Welcome to SkyTeam's The Corporate Bartender. If you work in HR or make people decisions in your organization, this is the place to be. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It is Corporate Bartender time. You know what that means. It's time to share some stuff, to laugh, to have a drink, alcohol-laden or not. And we're going to hang out with Eve McLain. Look at Eve today. Everybody wave to Eve. Hi.
Coming from the couch.
We are, Eve's doing it from the couch where she has her fireplace going. So it is a literal fireside chat with Eve McLain today.
Yes.
So we are episode 54, September 9th. And let's just get right on into it if I can get my mouse to work. Today's agenda, I don't think we have any newbies today. It looks like regular crew. Got a little bit of news, framing question, and then we're going to talk to Eve like we do. The news was interesting today. I was just kind of looking around at, the return to office stuff that we talk about on a regular basis. And here we are, September. It's still just all over the map. I thought this article from the conference board was interesting. 35% of U.S. companies do not know when they'll reopen.
Yeah.
Right? Here we are, 6 months in. We still have no idea. GM and Ford both joined the cadre of companies staying out until June 2021.
Have you wondered if the other 65% who do know when they'll reopen are actually lying or will end up changing their mind?
Exactly. Reed Hastings from Netflix put it this way: we'll go back to work when the majority of people have been vaccinated.
Jeez.
Right? I thought that was a biggie. And, Google and Facebook and Uber, and they're just, everybody's sort of putting the mark in the sand at next summer sometime. And who even knows what that'll look like? We had the AstraZeneca vaccine. I don't know if you guys saw. It was put on pause today after somebody got sick with the thing that they don't know if it was caused by the vaccine, or so they got to pause it and figure out what happened. Apparently, it's not that uncommon, but it was being reported on as if it were a major setback. So I was just thinking about how that plays into, especially Reed Hastings' comments. I mean, who knows when that'll be? That next summer's a broad swipe, but that's a bold statement. And it was interesting because in that article, and I'll put links on the webpage and in the network so you guys can check out the articles. In the articles, he calls working remotely a complete negative, which I thought was interesting. So he doesn't really dig it, but he's basically saying this is what we're doing. I thought that was worthy of note. Anybody else have any comments on this return to work debacle? Craziness?
Well, my comment is, I don't know, if I shared this last week, I so just humanly apologize. But I have some connections, as probably you do as well, for people in the medical world. And unfortunately, the virus is mutating. And in terms of a vaccination, it's going to be like the flu vaccination. It's going to be very specific to a strain, specific to a season. So I think we need to be realistic on how we think the efficacy rate of a vaccination, and certainly a first edition, is going to be. So,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Just sharing is caring.
just a little jolt of sunshine there, Tina. Thank you.
Very true. I mean, the whole goal of a virus is to spread. And if it is killing itself off, like it was in the very beginning, it was so powerful that it was killing off its host. So it has mutated into not killing off its host and being able to transition from person to person. And so that's why we see it's continually mutating. And just like you said, Tina, there's a vaccination isn't going to be necessarily the end all be all.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I take solace in some of the research that's done on RNA and I can't remember which cells. It's a letter, T cells maybe, and basically what they're finding in the early research is that people who are exposed to a lot of colds over time, because colds are coronaviruses as well, have less severe symptoms. At least that's how the first tranche of research is looking. So it adds some credence to your mom's idea of rubbing some dirt on it and getting back in the game. So I thought that was interesting. So if those built up antibodies that have fought coronaviruses in the past loosen or reduce your severity, that helps with a vaccine that's specific to one strain. But yeah, it's a mess, and it looks like it's going to be a mess. I saw another article today that I almost put in here. The headline was, "So what did college administrators think was going to happen?"
Right, and now we can't go home. They're like, "Don't send the kids back home. We don't want them."
My first week of class, I think I've already got 5 or 6 kids on quarantine. So
wow.
Yeah, my kids started back this week, so
we'll see how long that lasts. Right on. Well, in the spirit of our conversation with Eve today, I wanted to put the framing question up as, what ethical challenges are you guys seeing in this distributed workforce, work from home type of situation? Are you seeing anything new? Is it the same old greatest hits? What's happening out there for you on the ethics front?
Can I share examples from my boss?
he sits up straight.
Oh, you're asking a specific person.
I think that's a generic question, right? I'm being careful not to kick this one off.
Right. Generic question. Anybody noticing anything different? Are you dealing with the same sort of employee issues? Are there different sort of ethics violations or cheats on time or anything, really? I'm just curious. Maybe your employees are awesome.
One thing we haven't, knock on wood, and you may have talked about this in a prior edition, but seeing a lot of reports around with everyone working from home, what are the types of workman's comp claims that are coming up, and insurance, and just what it looks like.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to put that out in the ether, but there's definitely noise in that.
Yeah, well, I know Lori and I were talking the other day about, folks who have been sitting in folding chairs for 6 months. At what point does that translate into workers' comp claims?
Yeah, we're actually investigating some of the budget savings from our lack of travel, reinvesting into some sort of dollar amount for each employee to invest in office productivity, whatever that looks like in your environment, which kind of speaks to that whole, are we going back in January? Are we going back in March? Are we going back in June? Right. And that because of the length of time people have been home, we're hearing from a variety of sources. I just got back from my chiropractor, or I, just had to get acupuncture for my neck pain because of these, temporary circumstances that people have been working in. So we're trying to maybe mitigate that a little bit.
I think
that's funny. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that temporary part with the quotes has been the big kicker, because even my husband's employer, he does a job where you really don't want his constituents to have his number, his home number or his cell number. And so even this far in, he's been home since March. They still have to call his desk, leave a voicemail. He then has to call it, then put the, *69 or whatever the heck that thing is, and make the phone call out. And everybody's kind of like, this is really too long to be temporary. Should we be paying for people to have a phone at home? Should we be paying for part of for their internet usages? I mean, if you think about it, we've been out of the office for almost a year now, or I guess 6 months, but it feels like forever.
Dog years.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
Exactly.
dog years.
Yeah, it's interesting, the notion, this temporary thing. Temporary has lasted longer than a lot of employees I've hired over the years into a gig, right? Yeah. Well, that's a good segue. Eve's here with us today, and many of you know Eve and know of her awesomeness. She's kind of been around the block. She's been there, done that, got the T-shirt. She's the director of education for the Business Ethics Alliance in Omaha. And they're out there to help organizations get better, building leadership and strengthening them through positive, practical business ethics. She's been in the game for a while. She's been an HR person, a leadership development person. She's got over 20 years of experience in this space. She's got global experience. I've had the good fortune of doing programs with Eve in England and Germany. Never made it to the Far East, but hey, there's always the future. She's degreed. She's legit smart. She knows about coaching and training and use of psychometrics. And she's now a professor of business management at Midland University. And she said she's already got 5 students in quarantine. How many students are in your class, Eve?
41.
Oh, so decent percentage there.
Yep. But I had to laugh because when I went into this, I'm like, we're going to be writing papers. We're not going to be doing all these tests because I don't want to know what they can regurgitate. And they're like, you have 41 students. I'm like, shit, I'm not reading that much every week. I was like, quizzes. These poor students. Seemed like a good idea.
Tell us a little bit about you, about your background, your career journey, and any weird jobs or stuff that you might have done in your past.
Yeah. So my weirdness started at the beginning. I went to college for mathematics and computer science. And it's because I have a deep love of algebra and process systems, frameworks, all these things.
Hold on. Let me pause you there. You have a deep love of algebra.
Deep love. Deep love. So you know what's so cool about algebra? There's 2 things that's cool about algebra. Number 1, you can get this seriously complicated thing and get it down to something simple. That's the first thing. And number 2, there's always an answer. It doesn't even matter how weird it is. It can have letters in it. It can be like a string long, but there's always an answer. So it's more about problem solving, which is what I loved about algebra. And that's what surprised me. But I was kind of screwy and thought it was in algebra that I loved. So I went to major in that. And
how'd that work out for you?
In algebra, I always came up with an answer, but my teacher didn't always agree it was an appropriate answer.
That's her fault.
I needed you 30, 40 years ago.
Well, the algebra thing didn't work out so well. The first real argument that I got into was with an engineering student, and I argued that you cannot hold up a wall with an imaginary number. And I failed miserably. Like, it was a knockdown, drag out fight. And they were convinced that you could. And I was convinced that I was not supposed to be in this profession. And then the second problem was, is I went to college in the 90s. And so we were just figuring out things like social boards on the internet. And we were starting to play with technology. That's why I was going for computer science. And when you did your algebra, or when you did your calculus, if you did something wrong, putting it in the system would just fail, and it would give you like a random failure code 40. Failure code 40 had nothing that you could look up. So you didn't know if you put, if you were missing a comma in your coding, or if you had gotten the entire equation wrong in your calculus. There was no way. So I lasted in mathematics for a semester. So that was it.
So you tapped out, and what did you switch to?
Well, my husband came home, found me bawling on the bed, and said, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, "I don't know what I want to do with my life." And he said, "Well, what do you like to do?" I said, "I like to talk." And he said,
Did you major in talking?
I did. There's a degree in it. I have a degree in interpersonal communications with a minor in English and certifications in corporate training. And so I went out into the world with my degree in 1999 when the markets were flushed with jobs. It was awesome. It was the time to be looking for a job. And I joined, which was then US West. So it's now CenturyLink or Quest or whoever they became. And I went to do held orders. And so Colorado was a huge problem at the time. So when
we get that a lot.
Well, when they laid out the phone wires in Colorado, there wasn't that many people. And it used to be that you only needed one phone into your house. And in the 90s, people started getting fax lines and teen lines, and this internet thing came about, and all these people moved to Colorado and there were no phones. So we had held orders. And so that's what they hired me to help out with, is held orders. And while I was there, I saw something.
What did you see?
I saw something. I was young and naive, which was a great time to be alive. And I was watching, to get into this held order job, you had to go through 4 weeks of training and you took a pass-fail test at the end of it. And they failed out 66% of their participants. And so because I was young and naive, I did the math on what that costs the company. And I went up to my boss and said, "This is how much money it costs you to fail out all these people. And I can fix this, by the way." Why did I think that? I don't know what I was thinking. So they just kind of
did they give you a shot at fixing it?
Well, no, they sent me back to my desk and then go answer the phone. But about 4 weeks later, they came back and said, "Well, how do you think you can fix this?" And I said, "Well, you've got some problems." Because remember, I'd gone through the training. I said, "You have some problems. You have 4 weeks of content and it's all equal. Like the year the company was founded is as important as how you install a phone line. Every piece of content you provide is equal, and you cannot absorb that much content in your head, 160 hours worth of content, and then do a pass-fail test on it on these arbitrary things." So I helped them to create objectives, and they said, "Okay, we'll give it a try." So we created objectives. We put in quizzes. We founded a quality assurance group so that you could test the people when they got on the floor. We went back to the beginning of the hiring process and redid the hiring process, so you were only getting able-bodied candidates in the door. And then we created an OJT program that was really good at helping people practice the objectives that we had written. And we took success rate up to 97%.
Wow.
And so
you went from 66%
failure
to 97% pass.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. So it worked really well.
Cool.
So they said, "Well, that worked really great. So why don't you take Cheyenne, Wyoming?" So then I took over the training of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they said, "Well, that's going well. Why don't you take Sioux Falls, South Dakota?" So here I was at 23 years old at these exotic places of Omaha,
wow.
Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And that's where I went every week. I would spend a week at each location.
Garden spots, all of those.
Oh, it was awesome. I wasn't even old enough to rent a car. And because I had to drive to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, because you can't fly to Sioux Falls, South Dakota for under $1,000. I was like, route me through Hawaii. It doesn't matter. It's $1,000 to land there. At least it was in the 2000s. So you found yourself a training person. You had been a held orders manager, and now you're training people on technology, which I swore I would never do again. I swore when I left computer science, I said I will never do technology again, and I was wrong. I did a lot of it. So that's how I got to HR. I came up through the training route and ended up doing, and obviously I had a soft skills background. So my husband did some G.I. Joe stuff and deployed to Iraq. So I opened my own business and consulted with companies, did soft skills training, technical training. And then when I entered back into the workforce, when he was done G.I. Joeing, I went up through the OD path and found myself the head of a global HR for NTT Security with 1,500 employees around the world. So it was a trip. Yeah, it was a trip.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, I'm the OD girl. What am I supposed to be doing here? But we figured it out. That's good.
And now you're at you're at an ethics organization.
I know. Yeah.
So from technology to business ethics alliance, that's an interesting shift. Mm-hmm. In that role, given that your mission is to help companies, behave, stay out of trouble. What are the challenges that you're seeing in this weirdo time? Is it normal stuff? Is it new things? What are you seeing as challenges to solid ethics in this time?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing to solid ethics is that people's foundations aren't exactly what they thought they were. So they created these values and stuck them up on walls because there was this book somewhere that said you have to have a mission, you have to have values, and so they followed the list, and they got the values up on the wall, and they have things like employee first or whatever, and then all of a sudden they can't come into the office and they start saying, well, hang on, well, I need you here. It's like, well, but your values said employee first. Or so what is the need of mine over the client first? Well, no, we didn't really mean that. So the biggest thing I've seen is that people trying to actually live their values right now are finding that maybe the values they had weren't the best. But the other thing that I'm seeing that's super prevalent is that trust is really being challenged. So a lot of companies still have in their minds that I need to see your butt in a seat. And what's been interesting is through my career, I've ended up with a lot of global virtual teams. So I've had to kind of rethink how work should be done. And the way it needs to get done for me is very project centric. So how long should it take for you to do X type of project? Okay, get it done. However you need to get it done. If you need to go to the doctor's at 2:00 in the afternoon, go to the doctor's at 2:00 in the afternoon, then get back and do this. But that's not the common thinking of medium and small size companies. Medium and small size companies, the majority, not all of them, want to see your behind in a chair from 8 to 5 to feel like they've gotten the value out of you. And I'm watching people today still struggling with this concept of working, and you have to be physically in the location of work. So what was interesting is the company, when I joined them, also believed you had to be in the seat in the location. So it was really scary for them to flip to virtual teaming. But it was super fast for us. I'm like, listen, we already are using Google Docs behind the scene. We just went ahead and stood up Slack. We put in standard check-in meetings, right? And it's just like, you can connect, you can do this. You just have to be willing and intentional in doing it. And a lot of people still think this is temporary. They're really worried about this concept of how long it's going to be. And so they're not willing to jump into the technology they need to support it. Or even worse, they keep, asking their employees what they're doing every 5 minutes. And that's just scary. That's not a good way to work.
Do you find that breaks along generational lines?
Yeah. So what I find is that the millennials have been asking for this for a long time. And the gig economy concept is legitimate. And I've watched some really big companies start to do some creative stuff, like how many hours do you work for us before we start to give you benefits, right? Not we have to hire you for a $20.80 a year job anymore. But now if you work up to this many hours, you're now eligible to come into our benefits package. They're starting to rearrange how to get these gig and millennials actually to be able to work for them while still shoring up some of the things that we don't offer in this country, which is like medical benefits across the board, right? So it's still a competitive, it's a differentiator for them. So I'm finding that millennials all along have been asking for something that provides a little more work-life balance, flexibility. They're asking companies to be more willing to do CSR. They're driving this stuff, and the truth is that we have to answer it. So unfortunately, it has been kind of older folks that have been saying, I really need to see butts in seats. But I've met tons of older managers that are not that way. It's just coincidentally lining up that it seems to be the ones that are like, we've got to get back in the office. Was literally an old white lawyer last week saying this. I was like, oh, you're so stereotypical. And he was really pushing this point home. But I'm not sure that it is, I am not a millennial and I love what they're doing. So I'm like, I want to come in on your bandwagon. I want more work-life balance. I want more flexibility, and I want a company that contributes to the greater of the world.
That's really important. It's funny. You reminded me of, I was working for a software company, I don't know, 10 years ago. And one of the developers, young guy, got into it with our CFO, older white lady. And we were going through a situation where we were replacing the air conditioning. And so the building was like 200 degrees and nobody wanted to be
Miserable.
there. Right. And so each team was sort of launching their own work from home, work remote program. And the CFO hated it. And I heard the two of them kind of getting into it in the cafeteria one day. And he said a thing that just made me laugh so hard. He said, "What is it with you people and 8 o'clock? I don't get it."
What is so special about 8 a.m.?
Right? Seriously. It's a number on a clock. So
I know.
What I think is interesting about this, Eve, this notion of, a group of people, a generation, if you will, wanting and having been pushing for this for a long time, we would have never done it because of the risk involved.
Yep. Correct.
Right. But right now, we don't have a choice, right?
Yep. Risk and cost. So I take a look at, I was talking to the senior ethicist for our Nebraska medicine. And he said, if you look at telehealth, we've been resisting it for years because of the cost associated with it and having to figure out all the details around it. We flipped that thing around in weeks and we're never going back. Right. So I think there's a lot of things that are inhibiting people from jumping into this space. But look how quickly not only have we figured it out, but the majority of people are being successful. And before this, I worked for a company that had remote and regular. And I was really astonished when I talked to the managers. They're like, "What do I have to do special for my remote employees?" I was like, absolutely nothing. So what would you do for your regular employees? If you would walk by a regular employee's desk and say, "How you doing?" then I expect you to ping your remote employees remotely and say, "How you doing?" Are you having one-on-ones? Are you talking to them? If they're not doing their work, are you telling them you're not doing your work? When, I was expecting this by 2 o'clock on Friday, I didn't get it. I have, other work waiting for you to get done. So are we holding people accountable? It's just a location, right? It's not about a different style of management. It's about being cognizant that people have needs to be respected and to be wanted and to be needed, and they need human contact. They need that if they're sitting next to us or if they're somewhere else remote. And we just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I think about this notion of having the playing field leveled. Right. Because tech companies, I've spent most of my career in tech companies, and we always had distributed teams, but there was a core group of people in the office, and then there was the onesie twosies who were out in the field. So when we'd have a meeting or a get together, there'd be 12 of us in a conference room eating pizza, and poor Eve at home in Omaha eating dry toast by herself.
Right. Right.
And now we're all eating dry toast by ourselves.
That's exactly right. And what's funny about that is, so it was probably about 10 years ago, I started playing with distributed teams, and I was at an international company. I was doing communications for this company in their OD realm. And we had the strategy of what we wanted. We had 5,000 employees, and I had to get the strategy in the hands of every employee. the company had been through a lot of change. So I said, I want it to come from the managers. I want the manager to talk directly to the employees. And so we said, okay, let's do that. So I set up this deck, here's your PowerPoint slides you have to share. It's like 15 you had to share, and then like 90 in the appendix you could choose from. But this is what you have to share. And then I checked up on the managers. I actually started spot calling the employees around the world and saying, what do you know? What were you told? How did this go? What do you think about it? What's the strategy in one word or less? I mean, just stuff like that. And what I found is every time there was that team you were just talking about, there's 10 people in Omaha and these 2 stragglers that are usually like in India or Romania or somewhere over the ocean. Every time that conversation had to jump the ocean, it failed every time because the manager was like, well, I'll record this and Sally can just watch it on her own time. That was like the number one tool of management at the time. So I thought, wasn't that interesting? So I decided to do some stuff different with my team because I had a team like that at the time. I had a group of people in Omaha and I had 1 in Romania and 2 in India. So I said, no more. We will no longer go into a team meeting in a room. We will always do these remotely from this moment on. So I had 3 people sitting together in cubicles that are on the phone in the same session. It was unbelievable what it did for my team camaraderie because now they all got on, and instead of asking the person sitting next to you, what are you doing Saturday? They started asking each other on the calls. They were intentional. When somebody's phone was kicking out in India because the lines weren't that good 10 years ago, somebody else would hurry up and IM them. Oh no, this is what was said. Like they paid attention to each other as being on the call. So that was the idea of leveling the playing field. And now that's where we all are, right? And we have to be intentional about how we work with one another to work together well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that story. It makes me think of a client that we work with from time to time. You're probably familiar with them. They rhyme with frugal. And they had a policy.
Small little company.
Yeah, tiny startup. They had a policy called Cams Up that when we first started working with them, I didn't love because I don't like looking at this. But they have largely distributed teams. They put their teams together based on talent versus location. So you're spanning the globe on most teams. You may have a concentration of 10 or 15% in a location, but that's really about it. So basically when you get together and get on a meeting, cameras are on.
Yep.
And what's interesting about that's different than a conference call, because conference call, you log in and until everybody's there, it's hard to even remember conference calls right now anymore. You dial in and until everybody's there, you keep doing your stuff. You're just doing your email or whatever. Well, their policy of cams up was you dial in, cams up as soon as you dial in. And what was interesting about that was it took me like about 3 weeks to acclimate to that idea.
Yeah.
And then the small talk conversations that happen in a meeting room while we're waiting for the leader to get there just started happening naturally. Mm-hmm. And, because I'd seen you in this digital space a handful of times. I knew a little bit about you. I knew you had kids. I knew they were boys. I knew kind of what they were into. And we ended up having these conversations that we would have never had on a conference call. Right. And I thought that was a really cool thing. And I thought, man, there's no way that's ever going to catch on.
Well, yeah, it is.
and here we are.
Well, if you remember, so a boss I had before here was out of the UK, and she had a cameras on requirement, and it just killed us because the meeting times were either 6 a.m. my time that hit the UK at about 2 o'clock or something. 1 o'clock. I don't even know what time. No, that'd be noon. Hit them at noon. And then it hit the Australian group at like 9 p.m. So all of us are trying to get on this call. So you've got Australia trying to go to bed, us trying to get up. So then we'd switch it and rotate it around. So sometimes it would be evening time for the UK. And at first it was super uncomfortable because 6 o'clock in the morning, it's like WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, man. I show up, my hair's like this. There's no makeup on. I'm still got a pillow mark, and I've got a cup of coffee in my hand. I'm like, I'm on, and but we all got used to that. Like it wasn't it actually kind of pulled some of the pretense away from us and actually started to get us a little deeper into the social penetration theory, the whole COM theory of how we get to know each other. Shrek was brilliant. We are like onions. We have layers, right? So it created these questions. Somebody's in their workout gear and you're like, what are you on your way from? You know, it's like, oh, I do yoga. Seriously? Yeah. So it opens all these conversations and you start to get to know people all from having cameras up. But the cool thing about cameras up is I can catch your nonverbals. I can catch the idiosyncrasies. I can see when you're scrunching your eyes. I can, you know, I don't know. It's just pretty cool.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about your time in corporate.
Mm-hmm.
You spent a lot of time as leadership development, OD, talent person. You coached a lot of people. What are the things that have served you the best over the years in that space? That's where most of us live. We live in HR, OD, L&D, talent. What are the things that have served you the best over the years in your career?
Well, the first is to this idea of strength-based leadership, right? So realizing that your team shouldn't be people just like you. So when I first got out into corporate America, I really wanted a group of people that were like me because that made sense to me, right? I knew what I was good at and I wanted to increase my efficiency. I wanted to increase my productivity. And my way to do that was to hire people like me who could do more of what I did. So that's like having 10 of me. As it turns out, that's a really bad thing. So you don't want 10 of me. It's a lot to take. So what I found actually is way cooler is to hire people who have complementary skill sets and then create an entire team of complementary skill sets. So maybe I have two people that are strong at something on the team together so they can do fallback for each other. But then the other person pulls something in. So somebody's really good at organizing us. I never keep track of anybody's birthdays. There's always somebody on our team that's like the social person, right? They're the ones that make sure that everybody's birthday is celebrated, that we remember that somebody's graduating from a so-and-so or their kid is doing this. There's always somebody that can be detail-oriented and making sure we're following the project correctly and getting it done, an implementer. And then there's your big thinker people, but it is having that creative mix has been really awesome. And then to cross-train each other has been really a cool way. So because everybody talks about development, and development is this like scary word for a lot of people. Like it has to be this massive development plan and I have to be sending you to 14 conferences a year or I'm not investing in you. And development isn't really about that. Cross-training and actually learning from a peer can be part of somebody's development plan and trying to take a better, more holistic look at what it means to grow. Read a book, read an article. You have a person each week bring an article in that they found interesting in your industry and report it back to the group, just so that we can help each other to continuously get better and better.
Yeah. Thinking about that concept of team and building a team, you know, intentionally going out and hiring people that aren't good at what you do is a lift. How do you get that team to connect, to gel, to come together?
Yeah. So the biggest and the fastest way that I do for gelling is I give them a problem and I get the hell out of their way. So we had this team in Romania that had a really toxic manager. I mean, really toxic manager. He was undermining the senior leadership team who was out of America and was creating this huge sense of fear and insecurity in the team out there. And we made the decision that we had to remove him, and it couldn't happen slowly. This guy was cancerous. We had to remove him fast. And the SVP is like, well, what am I going to do? Because it's going to leave a vacuum, a hole for these people that have all been kind of feeding off of this guy's fear. And I'm like, give them an unsolvable problem. They were all technical people, right? So I'm like, give them something that they can work on that's hard and will require them to lean on each other and each other's strengths and stay out of their way, because they've been told so long how to think, how to feel, and how to act. If you want these folks to gel, then you have to give them a task and have them solve it together with you not in the way. And it was a really effective and fast way to get that team turned around. And it gave them a sense of accomplishment and success to work together.
That's awesome. I love that you said give them an unsolvable problem. That's an interesting, right?
They'll solve it. And they did. They actually ended up with a new product line out of it. So it was good.
That's cool. What about this notion of, business is business and personal is personal? What's your take on having people talk about actual life stuff with each other?
Yeah, it has to happen. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I think that's one of the worst things we've ever done in corporate America is we've decided that I don't pay you for your personal opinions and beliefs. So special interest groups and organizations are one of the most amazing things ever founded. So SIGs is what we used to call them, SIGs. And I've been in the technology realm for a really long time. And what we found is we could connect people on a love of cats. We could connect people on a love of gardening. We could connect them on boating. And what was hilarious is these two people go deep into the trenches on cats, and then a project goes red, right? You're coding, you got to get this thing released by Friday. It's breaking everywhere. And the guy you connected with over cats is willing to stay overnight and work that damn project with you like nobody's business, right? So this idea of allowing people to be human, to bring their interests to work and to connect to one another and actually do it on company time is so impactful. People don't work this 9 to 5 concept. They don't work 40 hours straight through. They need breaks. They need to think. And they have these ebbs and flows of creativity and ebbs and flows of productive time. And we can't make people feel bad for not being completely on for 40 freaking hours dead straight through. And we need to give them an opportunity to connect to one another as human beings and get to know each other. And they will do amazing things together if you do.
Yeah, it's funny. Spawned so many thoughts in my head. When you say SIGs, special interest groups, it takes me way back to my pre-internet bulletin board days.
Yes.
when you took your acoustic phone and put it in a modem, and you would go onto these bulletin boards, and they were organized by interest, by topic. Yep. And I met so many people that I never would have met, and ended up doing things with them, music things or work things or whatever.
Careful just because what you disclose.
Yes, I will not talk about my time in the Dungeons and Dragons SIG.
Precisely.
But this notion of doing this, allowing people to connect as human beings with each other at work, and sponsoring it, right, as an organization. Because we talk about this a lot here, just the notion of, especially now and in this time when we find ourselves as Americans working on average 3 hours longer a day than we did in February. And I don't know about everybody else, but myself, I don't give myself extra credit for working late, but I still feel bad when I'm not working at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Exactly.
And so what's your advice on, even if the company isn't doing anything holistically, as a leader of a team, what are the things that you can do to make that okay?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot that goes into answering that question. First of all, you have to talk to your team, right? You have to be real intentional with your team, and you have to be able to say to them, you know what? I see you. I see that you have delivered on this project. I watched that project had 15 obstacles, and I watched you overcome those obstacles. And I know that you're working hard and late. So, when you're trying to take this half day off of PTO, just take it. Don't take the PTO. Just step away from the computer, breathe a little bit, and be okay. But that gets into a major issue we've got, which is rules. We're very rule bound as organizations, and there's an interesting thing. Milgram's study. Anybody take Psychology 101, where you had to learn about Milgram, and so in Psych 101, there was this guy, this academic, who was like, I can't believe that anybody would follow what happened in the Nazi concentration camps. I cannot believe that this many people would be willing to carry out those atrocities. What the heck is wrong with people? So he went out to test, was authority really that big of an indicator of people's willingness to do unethical behavior? And freakishly, holy crap, it was. So what he did to set up these studies is he had like an actor that would pretend to be a student, and then he would bring in another student, and he would say, okay, your job is to shock this person every time they get an answer wrong. And the first level of shock is like just a little buzz, but it goes up to like and I suck at details, so I think it's like 400 something. I don't know. But it's enough to kill you, okay? So it can go up that high. So as these people are apparently giving the wrong answer and the person's supposed to be shocking them, they actually start to get physically tense as they're going up in the shocking ranks. And they're starting to get physically ill by having to give these higher level shocks. And they're starting to say, I don't want to do it. Because every time they'd shock this actor, the actor would like, yell and give this negative feedback, and you're hurting me.
And they weren't really shocking him to be.
They weren't
clear.
really shocking them. No. Nobody was harmed in the making of this exercise. But there was the guy running the thing was standing on the side saying, you have to, this is your job. You signed up for this. This is what you said you would do. You said you were willing to carry this all the way through. Well, over 70% of the people took it to a level 4, the highest you could get, the one that could actually kill people. And every single person took it to a level 3. And they thought, well, maybe that's just a fluke. They repeated it over and over and over again. And in our place in the ethics world, we call that a blind spot of authority, that you're willing to do things that authority figures tell us. Well, that carries to us into business. And sometimes businesses don't even have to tell us stuff. I ask managers all the time, why are you so hard on that employee, that they have to be at their desk at this time and this time or this? And he's like, it's a rule. I know it's a rule. I'm like, where is this rule? I don't see this rule. They have this idea in their head that there's this big boss watching over them with this book of thou shalt and thou shalt nots, and they're not willing to challenge it. They're not willing to try it, and they're not defending those team members. The biggest, most influential person in a company to an employee is their direct manager. And that direct manager is the most, is the number one indicator if an employee is going to feel engaged, satisfied, and willing to go above and beyond and give discretionary effort. It's all up to that manager. And this manager is sitting there waiting to be told what they can and cannot do, and believing that they have these authority figures over the top of them telling them that they can't have these liberties. There's very few companies that are actually like that.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. The self-imposed limitations we put on ourselves around what we think we're allowed to do and not allowed to do, what we think the expectations are, or what we think puts us and our teams in the best light. We make that shit up all day long.
All the time. Yeah. I had a group. I had this group of directors once. This blew my mind. And I'm not talking like 5 or 6 directors. I'm talking about almost every freaking director at the company. We had gone through a lot of change, a whole bunch of change. And I had this executive team that was so frustrated because they kept putting out strategy and the strategy would fall flat. Nobody was picking it up and trying to implement it. So I pulled the directors into a room and I said strategy, what are you doing about it? And they said, we're waiting to be told. Wait, I don't understand. What do you mean? I'm waiting for my SVP to tell me what he wants me to do. I'm like, no, you're the director. So as the director of the company, you take that strategy and decide, how can I implement this to the best of my abilities? And you cascade that out to your team. They literally were on hold. And I'm not talking 1 or 2. I was talking about the whole bloody company was on hold waiting to be told what to do. And it wasn't, we actually had to go in and tell them, you are empowered. Here you go. Here you go. This is your moment. I grant it to you now. I want you to go forth and direct. And, but it was a really big deal.
Because it's your job.
But it's this weight, I feel like I can't do anything right. Well, do something. Step forth and move, manage.
Right. Yeah. So Eve, if we could all do one thing different to improve our quality of life during this crazy time, how should we show up differently? What can we do?
Yeah.
What's your golden nugget for us?
Yeah, my golden nugget. Good God, that's a good one. Well, I think I'm going to do the golden nugget that I was using before, which is connect to your people. Absolutely connect to one another in ways that maybe we haven't done before. I've seen companies sending out lunches at the same time. So they're doing Grub Hubs. So they're doing virtual lunches.
Oh, that's
where,
cool.
Yeah, everybody gets a certificate to order lunch, and it all gets delivered around the same time, and they get online and they do lunches together. But for me, the number one thing that people can do right now is be intentional about connecting to one another as human beings and being allowed to have those relationships, even though they look different, because this temporary is lasting a really long time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love the idea of, I don't know why I never thought about the whole DoorDash Grubhub thing where you can actually send the same food. So I don't have to have dry toast. I can have pizza like everybody else is having or whatever. Yeah, that's a super idea. Super idea.
We're lucky
Right.
we live in a whole different time for that now, because that was not
Right?
happening 10 years ago.
No. You can have anything show up at your door in minutes. It's weird.
That's cool.
Even that stuff.
Be well behaved.
Guys, what questions do you have for Eve and just anything that we've talked about? We've covered a lot of ground, from everything from crazy career journeys to ethical dilemmas, this notion of trust, the generational divide therein. We've talked about how to build connection in and among teams, and it's funny when you started talking about the Milgram study, it made me think of my sort of baseline golden nugget, and that's the don't be a dick rule.
I love that. Just be nice.
Just be nice. Don't be a dick. If you could do anything today, don't be a dick. That's
exactly. That sounds like good advice.
So Eve, I was thinking about when you talked about the group of directors who were waiting, right, to be told. And I don't know if this is a appropriate or inappropriate analogy to a study that was done on monkeys.
Oh,
but
I know where you're going.
Right. So there were these monkeys, and they had bananas that every time a monkey climbed this ladder to get to the banana, they would get like cold water sprayed
all over them.
Right. And so then over time, the group learned if any monkey went to the top of the ladder, they would grab him and beat the crap out of him. Like, no, nobody touches the bananas because we all get hosed down with wet water, and that's no good. So they slowly started substituting the monkeys. So they'd bring in a new monkey, right?
They train him.
Right. And the first time he climbs the ladder, they beat the crap out of him until eventually they had rotated out all of the monkeys. None of the monkeys in the room had ever been sprayed with water, but they all knew if you climb the ladder, you get beat up.
That's exactly right.
Right? It's that whole idea of not once, but over and over reminding people they are empowered to do things. And that if there's this lore of history of you don't take risks because you get fired, right? Nobody's ever experienced that. But somehow there's this fear that that's going to happen. And so you have to work against that proactively, or you get beating up the monkey who tries to get the bananas.
No, that's absolutely perfect. There's a bias called the conformity bias, right? Where so they had a negative reinforcement in that example you had, but there's been other studies, and this one actually wasn't even a study. It was a TV show. It was like one of those hidden cameras where there was this guy that came into a waiting room. He was waiting for an eyeglass appointment, and this ding would go off, and the guy would stand up and sit down. He was an actor. So he'd stand up and sit down every time the ding went off, and it happened over and over again. And the next guy comes in who is not an actor, and he notices this guy is like standing up every time the ding happens. Eventually he starts standing up too. And he has no idea why the other guy's standing up. He's just following along. And then he goes off into the background and another person comes in and it dings, and I'll be damned, he trains the next guy to stand up. So they're all standing up, but it's a conformity bias. It's this desire to fit in. So even in your monkey situation, even if you get a go-getter in there, that group will push to pull him down, but that person will also, instead of breaking free from that, wants to conform to whatever the norm is, whether they're aware of what that norm is or not. Unfortunately, it can also be unethical behavior. So when that thing happened at Wells Fargo, so when they started opening those accounts up and without asking permission, some people came in and they're like, what the? But they were getting positive reinforcement. They were getting rewarded for it. They weren't being held accountable for it. And so other people started doing it. They were actually training each other, which is how it became such a big deal. It's that conformity bias concept. But so, yeah, it can cause a lot of interesting issues. It's a good one.
Funny. That's funny. Any other questions for Eve?
Just more of a comment, Eve. I really appreciated the fact that you chose to reach out to one another. I feel like we are so isolated, and even though we have all of our social networking and everything that we're dealing with right now, it's not enough. And it's very much, I miss the people that are in my support team, and I don't see them and I don't talk to them. So I think after this call, I'll reach out to a few people.
Maybe do a lunch with them too. I've got a group of friends that every other week at 1:00 we do a virtual. We just get together and talk about what's been going on the last couple of weeks. And I have to tell you, to Eric's point, that was so hard for me to put that in the calendar because I was like, it's the working hours. Oh my God.
Right. Yeah.
But it makes me a better employee after that I've had this chance to actually decompress with people.
For sure.
What I'm noticing is people are getting fully booked, double booked, triple booked, where then they're having to prioritize which meeting do I not go to and who do I let down or who do I whatever, just to get through the day.
Yeah.
And people aren't even being respectful of, you have the technology to see if they've got a space in their Outlook calendar and well, screw it, I'm scheduling it anyways. And it creates this anxiety and this daily juggle of how am I going to spend, to Eric's point, how am I going to spend my 9 to 10 hour day now, where the idea of can I actually just sit with my team and have coffee for 30 minutes seems unattainable, right? Yep. Because what do you ditch the 2 business meetings that were scheduled during that time? And so I feel like, and that's something I'm hearing more in our organization. And so I think that's something that we're going to need to address at the executive level to start changing those norms, because those norms are headed in a really unhealthy direction.
One of the things too to focus on is giving people space. So we haven't had space since the pandemic has started. I've noticed we've had less space to think, less space to act. And then, so creating space in our calendars, actual room to digest what happened from the last meeting into the next meeting. We're missing space. It's just not existing right now.
So Ruby and I were on a workshop today with a client, and it was about time and energy management, ironically. And it was interesting because the CTO of this organization was letting the team know about some functionality within Office 365 that will automatically schedule focus time for you. It'll drop it into your calendar, which I thought was super cool, right? Because then it takes the onus off of you. You don't have to feel guilty about it, right? You push the button and then it drops it in on your calendar and nobody can step on that stuff. And I thought, wow, that's a really slick little idea, especially for folks who feel obligated or compelled to always be working, right? Because then people can't step on that, at least unless in Lori's example, they just go, screw it, I'm stepping on it anyway. Did you just do a double middle finger, Lori Lance? I think you did.
I did.
But, creating that space intentionally and let's be honest, right? If we built out white space in our week and we were only able to participate in 25% of it, we'd all be better off.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
We'd all be better off. So I think that's like the platinum nugget of the day. Schedule some time for you to do whatever the hell you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Read an article, read a chapter out of a book, go for a walk, go hit golf balls, sit and stare at the wall, whatever it is, right? I mean, this notion, and we talked about this in the workshop today, that sometimes your best thoughts come when your brain isn't solely focused on a task, right? That's why there's this whole idea about shower thoughts, right? The notion that your best ideas come when you're taking a shower because you're not thinking about anything and you're letting those processes just transpire. But we have to give ourselves permission to do it. And if we do that on a weekly basis, or I don't know, pick your time increment. If we do that on an incremental basis, and even if we only hit half the time, we'd all be better off, I think. Eve, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. This has been awesome. You're amazing. I love everything about you. You're one of my favorite people.
Oh, that's great. That just makes me feel happy. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give you guys some funny stuff and send you on your way. Today's funny stuff are HR memes. I thought you would appreciate this. So, funny thing number 1. I got to move my windows around here. HR in 2020. But wait, there's more. When you put SPHR next to your name on LinkedIn.
Nice.
Funny thing number 3, when the CEO stays on script during the all hands. Because I think we've all been there. Oh, this one's for Laurel. I love asking employees if they have a minute. Scares them every time.
Oh, that's so me.
And my favorite HR meme of the day, because who doesn't love a good Jules Pulp Fiction meme? Say employee engagement survey one more time. Oh, and guys, I did 2 workshops today, and I didn't have a lot of time. So your semi-quarantine cocktail today is cheap beer.
Yeah.
Hey, it works.
You'll see some greatest hits in here. Schlitz, Old Kill, PBR. And I didn't even know. See, I was aware of Beast Light, Beast Ice. I did not know there was a Milwaukee's Best Premium.
Premium.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
Guys, thank you so much. It was great to see you. Eve, thanks so much for being with us today. You guys are amazing. Love you all.
Bye.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.